We talk a lot about boomers and millennials, and lately we're all fascinated by Gen Z. But what about that generation kind of sandwiched in between, the one born roughly from 1965 to 1980, Generation X? They're the ones who quietly built so much of the modern world, yet they almost seem invisible.
So what's the deal with that? Why does this whole group just fly under the radar? Well, it's not because they're forgettable. It's because their psychology is one of the most unique and, honestly, misunderstood case studies of our time. To really get Gen X, you have to go back to the beginning, to where their whole worldview was shaped. And for so many of them, that was in the quiet of an empty house. This was the era that gave us the latchkey kid on a massive, massive scale.
And when I say massive, I mean it. Just look at this number. Research from the Times showed that by 1984, about 7 million kids, some as young as 5 years old, were on their own after school. This wasn't just a niche thing. This was the backdrop to an entire generation's childhood.
So what happens when you spend that much time by yourself? Well, you learn a lesson that sticks with you forever. You can't always wait for someone to show up and help. You figure out how to solve your own problems, you make your own dinner, you're in charge. It basically baked this idea of radical self-reliance right into their DNA.
Psychologists actually have a name for this kind of upbringing. They call it a high-contingency environment. It's a fancy way of saying there was no buffer. If you messed up, there was an immediate consequence. You couldn't really talk your way out of it or explain your feelings. It trained your brain to think a few steps ahead, to always be connecting actions to outcomes. And that conditioning still shows up today. Studies have found that Gen Xers are way less likely to reach out for social support when they're stressed. It's not that they don't have people who care. It's just that, deep down, asking for help can feel like you failed, like you couldn't handle it on your own.
But, it wasn't just what was happening at home. The entire world outside was sending them a pretty clear message. Nothing is stable. All those promises of how things are supposed to work? Yeah, not so much. So they started building up some emotional armor.
I mean, just think about what they saw. Divorce rates went through the roof. They saw their parents' generation give their entire lives to a company, only to get a pink slip. The rules for how to be successful seemed to change every 5 minutes. And all this was happening while they were literally practicing hiding under their desks for a nuclear attack. Talk about instability.
Now, you might think all this would just make them cynical, but it's more nuanced than that. This is a really important distinction. It created something psychologists call defensive pessimism. It's not about believing everything is awful. It's a strategy. You expect things to go wrong so that you're prepared when they do. It's emotional armor, not a philosophy.
This mindset also explains why they value privacy so much. Look, they grew up in a world where if you made a mistake, it was private. You had an awkward moment, you messed up, and then it was over. Now we live in a world where one bad moment can go viral forever. For a generation taught to be careful, that kind of public exposure just feels incredibly dangerous.
So you take this skeptical, super self-reliant person and you put them in an office. What do you get? Well, you get a totally unique and honestly often misunderstood work ethic. And it's all built around a very different definition of loyalty.
And here we have the central paradox. They watched company loyalty become a one-way street for their parents, so they just opted out. They weren't going to put their faith in an organization. Instead, their loyalty is to being competent, to being good at what they do. They figured, hey, the company might not stick around, but my skills will. I can control being the most valuable person in this room.
And life just kept proving them right. I mean, they were just starting their careers when the dot-com bubble burst. Then, right when they should have been hitting their peak earning years, the 2008 financial crisis wiped everything out. So is it any surprise that so many of them are obsessed with having multiple income streams? It's not just about being an entrepreneur. It's about building economic armor.
This all feeds into their very, shall we say, complex relationship with authority. They grew up watching institutions fail, from Watergate to Iran-Contra, so a fancy title on a business card, it means nothing to them. What they respect is actual skill. If you know your stuff, if you've proven you're competent, they will follow you to the ends of the earth. If not, they have zero time for you.
But there's one more layer here that is just absolutely crucial to understanding Gen X. They are, quite literally, the last generation that grew up with one foot in the old analog world and one foot in our new digital one. They are a living, breathing bridge. I mean, just stop and think about the sheer effort it took to learn something. If you had a question, you had to physically go to a library, figure out the card catalog, which was its own skill, and then hunt for a book. Compare that to now, where you just pull out your phone and have the answer in seconds.
And this isn't just nostalgia. There's real psychology here. It's a concept called deeper encoding. The basic idea is that the more effort you have to put into getting a piece of information, the more deeply it gets wired into your memory. They didn't just find facts, they had to earn them. And that changes how you value knowledge itself.
This hands-on, figure-it-out approach went way beyond books. You know, if your bike chain snapped or the TV picture started rolling, you couldn't just Google it. You had to get in there, get your hands dirty, and tinker with it until you figured it out. It built this amazing mechanical intuition, this deep belief that you could solve the problem right in front of you.
Okay, so we've got the latchkey kid, the defensive pessimism, the loyalty to competence, the analog mind. What does it all add up to? When you put all these pieces together, what's the core value that rises to the surface?
It really just boils down to this one idea: proven reliability. They grew up in a world that showed them again and again that it was fundamentally unreliable. So the highest possible value, the thing to aspire to, was to become the one person, the one thing that could be relied upon, the one who just quietly gets the job done.
And this quote just captures that idea perfectly. They're the bridge generation. And you know what? Bridges don't get a lot of glory. You don't really think about them. They're just there, doing their job, quietly holding everything together so everyone else can get where they're going.
And that leaves us with one final and kind of heavy thought. This generation holds the memory and the intuition of two completely different operating systems for the world. They understand how things worked before and how they work now. So the question is, what essential knowledge, what unique perspective do we all risk losing when that bridge is finally gone?